Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a non-spoiler book review and then a little bit of a spoilery chat for what is technically the very first book in Michael J. Sullivan's Riyria Revelations, which is the Crown Conspiracy. To clarify, these books are technically bind-ups of two of Sullivan's books, so I'm going to be reviewing just the first one, which is about half of that bind-up. I'm going to start with the negatives and then go into the positives. So the negative for me is something that I think most people won't even notice or won't even really care about, and it's a bit difficult to describe, but it kind of comes down to Sullivan's choice to write this story in what is almost third-person omniscient, but not quite. So there's different kinds of third person. I'm sure most of you know this. There's third person omniscient, which means that the narrator is essentially all-knowing and can see and feel and know everything at any one time. And then there's third person limited and third person deep, which are far more attached to a specific character. And generally speaking, you can have multiple point of view stories that are third person limited or third person deep, and those stories will just have different character point of views depending on the chapter, or maybe a page break where omniscient, you're going to go from one person to the next and you might get their thoughts, their feelings. And the reason that I said that this was sort of kind of omniscient is because whenever we have a group of characters together in this story, they don't really feel like any one particular character is the one that you are getting a scene from until you have every now and then one very random, usually somewhat trivial, not that important sentence where it describes a certain character thinking or feeling something. But again, it's not really that important and you could have inserted any of the other characters. I don't know that the approach of how he used third person sort of limited really did much for the story itself. So the story follows two main characters, Hadrian and Royce, who are this kind of buddy cop duo that you kind of can't help but root for, and they're thieves that don't really align themselves with any guilds. They're independent, they work on their own, and they usually take on jobs only when they have all the information that they need, but they take on a job that really they didn't have a lot of info on, and it causes them all sorts of trouble. Hadrian and Royce definitely have their own personalities. I did not at any point mix the two of them up. And then these two characters along the way of the story encounter some other characters who I thought also had very distinct personalities, and one in particular I adored, Myron. He is by far one of my new favorite characters. Anytime he was around, he was just such a sweet little cinnamon roll that I wanted to hug and be friends with and hang out with and tell him everything's gonna be okay. And then you have various other characters who all have a pretty good range of complexity. And whenever you would get scenes where those characters are alone, because we do kind of spend time with other characters besides just Hadrian and Royce, and whenever we get perspectives that are just those characters by themselves kind of thinking or reflecting on things, those scenes, in my opinion, were some of the best scenes because it really did feel like it was more third person deep. It really felt like you were getting their feelings, their emotions, their thoughts. And sometimes it would only be a couple of pages worth, but they were really powerful moments that I thoroughly enjoyed. However, a great deal of the story follows a lot of the characters, and whenever we had group scenes, which was most of the book, it ended up making it so that the narration didn't have much voice at all. Getting into the positives and how that likely won't outweigh the positives in any way. So one of the positives was the writing itself, the mechanics, the sentence structure, the descriptions, all of those things I really enjoyed. I definitely thought that the descriptions were very lush, and I really liked that he kind of would get into some of the more fantastical things that a lot of fantasy fans are into, like here's the layout of this castle, or here's what this landscape looks like. He did a lot of that without going so deep that it was page after page of description. I also think that if you are looking for a story that is not extremely dark and gritty and grim, you are looking for maybe more of a fun fantasy story, this is a great one. It never at any point, even when it would reference darker things, it never got so dark that I was depressed for the rest of my day. I often found myself laughing or chuckling or just feeling warm fuzzies. You kind of can't help but root for the good guys. You just want them to succeed. You're pretty sure they're going to. I will say that it's one of those stories where I don't know if I ever really felt like our characters were in danger, even when they were in danger, but it was still fun, and I don't think that was the kind of story it was supposed to be. Another positive is that he really did a very good job of writing a world that is flawed, and also you can tell that it is set up to empower men more than women without it feeling like women's hardships were just thrown in there for shock value. The women never felt like they were just there for the men. It never felt like the women were, like I said, the hardships of the women, some kind of sexual assault or the way their bodies are described. It wasn't so overdone to the point where you can just say, well, it's a sexist world, so it's fine. It was a sexist world, but the women were just still their own people, and the men were their own people. It wasn't like it was some kind of insensitive depiction or anything like that. He wrote people as people. This can't just be applied to how women were portrayed. It was portrayed in a lot of different things. So we have nobility in the story who often prove to act just like you would expect them to act based off of the upbringing they have. So one of our characters is a noble, and he's never really had to get his hands dirty. He's never really had to work super hard for anything, and he is a total snob. So again, everything that he is writing, everything Sullivan does with his characters makes sense to their characters. That's why I think his writing of the characters themselves was so well done, because it wasn't just, oh, well, everybody in this society is going to act based off of what I imagine medieval times were like. Kind of smushing together the positives and the negatives for the story, and how I think that sometimes the negatives ended up bringing the positives down, even though I think he did such an amazing job. An example would be, because these characters I thought were so well written, that let's say we're following a character who is maybe not as strong-willed, or maybe is more fearful and not as accustomed to danger. If I'm with that character and they are suddenly ambushed, that character is going to be so incredibly fearful. There's going to be so many thoughts running through their head. But because it wasn't really tied that strongly to any one character when we were supposed to be technically, it ended up losing, I think, some of the emotional impact that it could have had. And I just felt that perhaps there were a couple of missed opportunities where scenes could have been even more impactful, or maybe felt like the stakes were higher had I felt more of what the characters were feeling in those scenes. One last thing that can be kind of interpreted as either positive or negative, depending on how you look at it, but I definitely think that this felt a little old-fashioned in the sense that we got more about our heroes and their motives and their behavior than we did our villains. Our villains, to me, were not extremely fleshed out in this first story, and they almost felt at times a little too cartoonish. Our villains definitely had these moments where they're like, let's scheme about our evil plans, and they would also have moments where they're like, hey, good guy, let me tell you about my evil plan. Perhaps there will be villains that are done really well in future installments of this series, not saying there's no chance for that, but in this first one, I just didn't feel that the villains were super dived into, whereas I thought the heroes were done really well. I'm going to jump into a couple of little spoilery things for a second, and then I'll do some final thoughts here at the end, so if you don't want to be spoiled for anything, stop watching now. The death of our main villain in the story, Braga, I believe is how you say his name, that was, I hate to say it, but it was one of the most comical ends for a villain that I've ever come across, and not because of how he dies, but because of the reaction of everybody around. The character ends up, he's been kind of hinted at throughout the story as being a great swordsman. And then there's this ally to our heroes who was the only one that probably could challenge him. And this particular character supposedly back in the day lost in a duel to Braga, but he totally would have won if he'd had his own sword. And it's kind of been something that, you know, everybody's like, okay, sure, maybe. And his sons are like, I don't think so. I think we gotta accept our dad's not as good as Braga. Then, when Hadrian is fighting him, he kind of lets the other guy jump in, and this guy now has his own sword. They duel, they have battle, and he ends up winning. And he cuts off Braga's head. And then, immediately, the prince is like, Arista, I'm so sorry that I didn't believe you. And I thought I misread the whole decapitation thing, because the characters are witnessing this duel. the decapitation happens, and then the prince literally just goes and runs up to his sister and he's like, I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. And she's like, I'm so sorry that I didn't have the greatest of plans and it was a very muddied plan. I'm really sorry. And then Hadrian and Royce are like, where'd that dwarf go? And I'm like, is nobody going to react to the fact that there is now a headless, bleeding corpse on the ground? You guys just saw somebody's head get cut off. And it wasn't like, I don't feel like the princess and the prince were the kind of people that see that all the time, makes total sense to them. They're like, that happens like every other day in my life. Nobody flipped out at all. And in fact, the girl like lifts up her dress to make sure blood doesn't get on it when she steps over his body, and her brother walk hand in hand. And I was so confused. I went back and reread it multiple times because I was like, did his head get cut off? Did I misread this? I know that is the silliest thing to bring up, but with as much detail and everything that I felt Sullivan put into so much of the story, and as many differing personalities as he shows throughout our different characters, I was expecting, I don't know, at least one person to vomit or be surprised or shocked. I mean, I know it was the bad guy, but even the guy that defeated Braga, his sons come running, they're like, you did it, Dad, good job. And I'm like, what's happening? I feel like somebody needs to have a reaction to this. Even if everybody just came together and like high-fived each other, that would have at least been more of something. If everybody's like, oh, thank goodness, we did it, everybody, we did it. And they all kind of came together, and I don't know, even if they just like spit on the body or something, that would have been more. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying that I feel like nothing came of him being killed. Nobody did anything at all. Nobody reacted. It was really strange. The only other thing that I want to add, I talked about Myron being the most precious little cinnamon roll, and just want to eat him up. He is so cute. And just the whole joke with him, and he'd never really seen a woman before. I feel like Sullivan could have taken that whole joke and made it very, oh, hi, Luna. I feel like he could have made it very distasteful. And the first time he saw a woman, it could have been really uncomfortable and awkward and gross. But I just feel like Sullivan did a really good job of making it so kind of sweet and innocent and cute. And like a hint, like hee about the whole thing. It was just so precious. Hello, Luna. And I loved that he just thought the horses were so cute also. And when he sees a brown one, he was like, they come in brown? Do they come in blue? I would love to see a blue one. And nobody pays attention to him. And he's just fascinated by the horses. And I love that they tied that together with when he finally sees a woman. And he's like, they're even prettier than the horses. And they're like, yeah, maybe don't tell them that. And then when he sees the one guy's wife, who it's been hinted at throughout the book is drop dead gorgeous, and he's like, wow, I don't even want to think about horses when I look at her. And they're like, yeah, don't look at her for too long. He'll challenge you to a duel. I just thought all of that was so cute. Myron was just so precious. Anyway, that is it for my book review and slightly little bit chat on this story. I still thought this was a really solid, fun read, and it was one of the most amounts of fun I've had reading an adult fantasy book in a while, because a lot of adult fantasy is pretty dark and depressing. And I think if you're looking for that, you're going to really enjoy it. The things that I picked on, I think are kind of abstract and are things that a lot of people aren't even really going to notice. So if you are looking for a fun buddy cop, good adventure story, you are probably going to absolutely love this. Let me know your thoughts on specifically this first one, The Crown Conspiracy. Please don't give spoilers for the others because I don't want to be spoiled. But I am curious to know if you think that each installment gets better, if you kind of understand what I'm saying about the potential negatives, depending on how you look at things. Let me know if you feel that those things are different in the books going forward, or maybe if they stay somewhat consistent. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.